So I'm here with Sarah de Graaff in her very beautiful and calm blue, this is definitely a theme, blue yoga studio in Redfern. It's called Mind and Movement Centre.
Yeah.
And I thought I might start with that. Why did you call it Mind and Movement with no mention of yoga in the title?
Well, I really wanted to sort of not focus on this idea that people already have about what yoga is.
Yep.
So when you say the word yoga, things happen in people's minds and maybe they get like pictures of people doing certain things that they might not be able to do themselves easily.
Yep.
So choosing the word mind and movement just for me says, here, come and explore the way that your body and your mind work.
Excellent.
And that's what's important.
And the yoga is especially for people with depression and anxiety issues?
Yeah, or really any kind of feeling that they might be experiencing those issues or any diagnosis. My approach is that doesn't actually matter what other people say you've got or what label they give you, it's about your experience. So often people might have a diagnosis of one thing like depression, and then the experience that they're having is that there's lots and lots of thoughts of a negative nature. So the mind might be having an experience of anxiety or overwhelm. So it's really the experience of the individual that I wanted to focus on. Yeah.
Excellent. And carers as well.
Yes, because there's lots of evidence that carers end up managing their own mental health issues because they give so much and they're exhausted and fatigued. And also I think for me the thing that's really important about including carers is that caring for someone is a really beautiful thing to do. And I think there's so many opportunities in our world today to not have that connection, and it's something that's been valued since time began. Parents are doing it all the time. It's such an important part of our lives that if you're looking at creating a healthy situation for one person, it's never about just that person.
Yeah. And carers would certainly encompass yoga teachers.
Yes, definitely.
Do you think there's a need for support, more support for yoga teachers?
Yeah, look, especially having worked on teacher trainings, I see people who get so excited about something that they're so passionate about, and then go off into the world and start teaching and have maybe a big change in their lifestyle, but often they're kind of out there on their own. And actually something that I talk about a lot with one of my teachers is how to keep these support networks and structures in place, because Donna Fahy writes about it. When people come to a yoga class, they expect so much of you. You're never just a teacher. You're a priest, you're a doctor, you're a spiritual advisor, you're, a parent that someone might not have had in their lives. So to manage all of that is a really hard job.
Yeah, that's a lot of weight of expectations.
Yeah, totally.
Do you see a lot of yoga teachers who would really benefit from having some more support and for, seeking some assistance or some help with their own mental?
Well, I think my feeling is that more of a focus on health of the mind for everyone would be a really, really great thing. Like, wouldn't it be great if we were taught kind of meditation techniques in schools as children? Yoga teachers, I think, definitely could benefit from thinking about the mind a little bit more maybe and taking care of that, because it's so visible what we do with our bodies, and then whatever else is happening sometimes gets forgotten. And then you're tired as well, and then you're stressed, and you're a freelance kind of worker, you're traveling all around, there's a lot of
waking up at some ungodly hour.
And then teaching into the night, like all these things that you have to manage have an effect on your mind for sure.
Yeah. So do you not think that that's already catered for by the personal practice of yoga?
It depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think yes, some people are really good at managing that through their own practice, but definitely I talk to people, and it's happened to me where I get to a point in my practice where I'm like, I just have lost my direction a little bit, I need some help. And sometimes we can get really involved in practices that might seem good at the time, but the effect that they perhaps have on our mind isn't exactly what we want. For example, like if you're very interested in teaching dynamic practice, it might feel worthwhile to you to practice that way so that it informs your teaching. But if you're teaching a lot, you might be really tired. And you might need to rest a little bit more and give yourself permission to do that. So they have to align, and I don't think they often do.
And we were speaking earlier about some of the kind of new age thinking that kind of by definition is a little bit vague sometimes, because new age is not a defined path. It kind of takes in a whole bunch of stuff. Can you tell me some of the things where you think perhaps it's not very helpful, some of these philosophies or some of these beliefs?
Well, one of the things that I've come up against, and I find, quite sad, is that yoga is thought to be a cure-all. And there are definitely people who need to rely on other supports as well. And I find it quite sad that I've heard stories from students who say, oh, my yoga teacher said I shouldn't take medication or whatever. And my teacher always says that the yoga you do has to support your life. So if you're doing a practice that is maybe pushing other things that could help you away, then I don't think that's a really great thing. So, this idea that spiritual practice can replace medication, I don't think is a good starting point. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I don't think it's helpful to offer that to people. Maybe they can discover it in their own time. And this idea also that, there's so much we need to do to fix the body and to fix and make better, instead of perhaps accepting and being okay with things, even if they're a little bit kind of crap, because sometimes they are, and life's like that.
I thought you were going to say sucky there. Excellent.
Same thing.
Yeah. So if somebody goes through some tragedy, and I think anyone that's lived for any length of time, acquires tragedies. That's just the nature of life. But if somebody's acquired some tragedy, had some tragedy, how can yoga help, and conversely, how can it not help?
Well, when I hear the word tragedy, I think of, sadness and tears, and these kind of images come up, and this isn't something that's always encouraged. Like, you can cry behind closed doors, but maybe not in public. So I guess yoga can provide a space where these things are kind of okay, depending on how you practice, obviously. But I think that one of the things that I find very powerful about the practice is that if you bring into it this sense of allowing, like it's okay that things are kind of happening, you don't have to just pretend they're not happening and push them away. That can be really healing, because when you start to push things away, from my perspective, that creates a separation, which is not what yoga is about. On the flip side, if you're feeling really sad, or you've had some major incident that you are kind of dealing with emotionally, sometimes people can escape from that using yoga. Like, you can do that with everything, right? Like one of the teachers from the Jivamukti yoga lineage always says, don't get out of it, get into it. And I think he's talking about, life, like don't get out of it, get into life. But, face what's happening for you. Don't kind of, hide in something else. Like, I'm doing yoga, I'm really happy and I'm really energized and uplifted, even though this just happened.
Yeah. Do you think that's quite confusing for some people, especially if perhaps their experience of yoga has been relatively brief? They're relatively new to it. That idea that, it can be yoga to be completely depressed or crying or, in some kind of crisis.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I find really challenging is when students consistently say, am I doing it right? I'm like, what's right? Do you know what I mean? This idea that it has to look a certain way and that your practice maybe has to be asana.
Yeah.
Maybe your practice is just sitting with your sadness and being like, this is okay, this is who I am now. Maybe not tomorrow, but right now this is what's happening. Yeah. So I think it is confusing because people want to do things right.
Yeah.
And they might already have an idea about what right is. And I always sort of say, people think yoga's good. Like everyone has this yoga's good thing. But if you ask them why, they're often not able to answer clearly. So, yeah. I think that it can be really confusing because people don't always know why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can become something else to flog yourself and punish yourself with.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I have to do this right. If I'm not doing it right, I should do more practice, rather than let this be okay for today and try again, I don't know, I see people often do multiple classes in a day and I'm kind of thinking, where do you fit lunch in? This kind of I have to do more rather than just being kind of okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would you kind of handle it if you had a student who was getting a bit obsessive with their yoga practice?
Well, it comes up in different ways. Some people have this whole thing of am I doing it right? And wanting to focus on the intricacies, and sure, the alignment's important and all of this kind of stuff, but usually I'm kind of more likely to just say, just breathe and move and just keep doing it and don't worry about what it looks like, just do it, rather than stopping and talking and fixing and that kind of thing that happens.
So almost bringing acceptance into the actual moment practice.
Yeah, I mean, often I do talk about it, but I'll use examples of teachers that I think really kind of strip things away. So, people often say to me, am I doing it right? And I can see that it really turns on the thinking mind. So instead of experiencing the practice, there's a lot of, am I doing it right? Maybe I'll be better next time, and that happening. And there's a teacher in the States, Paul Grilly, who does these anatomy videos where he shows how what people do in a posture is informed by the shape of their bones.
Yeah.
Now, you don't go up to someone when you meet them and go, hey, what do your bones look like? No one knows what their bones look like.
Yeah.
And that brings a whole new meaning to what you can and can't do, I think.
Yeah.
It's you're never going to see what your bones are doing. Just feel it. Just do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So sometimes using other teachers' advice I find helpful.
Tricky.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. So you've opened the Mind and Movement Centre in Redfern, which is an area in Sydney which has a lot of need and a lot of issues, and it's a bit of a melting pot of different kind of people coming together, and very, very close to the city as well.
Yeah.
So what are you hoping, in an ideal scenario, what would the Mind and Movement Centre look like? Who would be coming in the doors?
Look, in an ideal world, I feel the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to share some of the things that I've experienced.
Yeah.
So when you ask me that, I think, wouldn't it be great if people came in that were kind of like me? Because then I can relate to them. So I guess I'm looking for people that are interested in yoga, you wouldn't come if you weren't interested. But you think that there's something more to it than just following what a teacher says. You might not necessarily be diagnosed with anything, but you might feel just dissatisfied in the mental kind of feeling, and we have these labels and diagnoses, but it starts way before that happens. And when something's going a bit funky. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think anyone has to, look a certain way. And I always say to people, it doesn't matter what sort of pants you wear and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, or whether you come with shoes or not.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if there's an ideal student except that they'd have to be interested. Yeah. And interested in more than the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think that other yoga studios could possibly do to make their environment more sensitive to the needs of people who might have bipolar or depression or anxiety or other issues?
It's very tricky, our language, but I think language has a lot to do with it. And often, and I've definitely done this in my own teaching, like used something I've experienced to try to connect with other people. But
personal
you never,
stories.
or not personal stories, but like, you'll feel it in your hamstrings. It's like, or this will make you feel relaxed, or the language that tells people what they're going to feel, I don't think empowers them to discover their own experience. So a lot of it could be around languaging and allowing what happens for you to be okay, rather than going, I have to stretch my hamstrings. So some of the languaging, I think, can be looked at in more detail sometimes, but that's a really hard thing, because, often I hear myself say something like, oh, that wasn't very PC, or whatever. But also just connecting with students, rather than having them come in as a faceless person, so that if they do have something that maybe yoga isn't kind of working with, they can feel okay about talking to the teacher about that. For years I taught in places where I could never have kept track of my students' names or whatever, and I think there's a limit to what you can do when you are involved with people that way. And there's a limit to what they'll, want to give to you as well. So chatting to people, I think, is really important. And I guess the idea that, I think I sort of was trying to talk about this before, like no one practice is going to be good for everyone. So encouraging people to figure out whether it's good for them or not. I mean, the classic example I use is like for somebody who's experiencing perhaps what we would label as anxiety, maybe shortness of breath and hot flushes. If they were to do a very energizing breathing practice like Kapalabhati or something, where they're breathing fast repeatedly, I'm not sure that would be the right practice to offer everyone.
And have you found that by openly telling people that you have bipolar, do you find that that has a commensurate effect on your students, where they feel comfortable to talk to you? Yeah,
definitely. Especially in regards to things that they might not always talk to other people about, like the sorts of medications that they take. And obviously I'm not in a position to give advice to anyone about that. That's for a doctor to do, a psychiatrist, really.
So everybody listening.
But but to just be able to share that and not have to hide it if they think that it might not be embraced or approved of. I mean, I definitely think, and I've always said this in regards to mental health, it shouldn't be something that's kept in the closet. It's obviously up to the individual when they choose to disclose, and it's a very personal thing, but the more that people talk about it, the more people will see who are living with it and successfully living with it, rather than living a life that looks really good but we don't actually know what's going on underneath.
Which causes a hell of a lot of pressure and more stress.
It's like having two lives. One's hard enough. I don't want two.
So could you shed any wisdom or advice for teachers who possibly are having students coming to them with, some big issues and big questions, where they possibly feel like they're somewhat out of their depth answering that? Could you kind of help
The
us
first
out?
thing I would say is that it's really important not to leave someone hanging or let them feel like they haven't been heard, because it's possible that that's happened to them you know, maybe a few times already, and that's contributing to the way that they feel.
Yeah.
So you don't have to answer the question, but and it's, you know, in my very first teacher training, I was always taught that saying no and admitting to people that you don't know is much more powerful than pretending that you do. But have somewhere that you can refer people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of the things that are offered as healing tools for these kinds of experiences are very expensive. So I think it's useful to have some people that you can refer on to that maybe have different price points.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people who aren't able to, you know, feel good, maybe unable to work, and maybe don't have a lot of money, and the services that are offered can be very, very expensive. So there are definitely experts in the yoga field, and there's lots of them that you can say, you know, I don't know, but this teacher will really know.
Yeah.
But outside of that too, like there are some probably services local to the yoga studio that you work in, and just knowing where they are and saying, maybe try going here.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, if someone does talk to you and disclose how they're feeling, that step for them can be really huge, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And to, you know, say, thank you, this is really brave, I think it's a really great step you've taken. What can we do to go on from here?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And what about yourself personally as a yoga teacher? What structures do you have in place to keep that health, that mental health, as, you know, robust, I guess, as it could be?
Well, there's a couple of things that I really rely on. One of them is a practice of yoga nidra. I've been practicing for years, and it definitely, you know, there are times when I use that tool more or less, but when I'm, you know, very fatigued and under stress, I always go back to it. You know, who gives you permission to lie down and do nothing for 20 minutes? Your Yoga Nidra CD does. How awesome. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I do, because I find that it gives me back energy when I often am in a position where I have to, you know, give energy.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I do, which probably doesn't fit into the normal structure of like, this is a yoga practice, is it's very important for me to be around nature. Like I could never imagine, and this is personal, like obviously for some people living in an apartment is ideal. I need dirt. I need ground and dirt and animals and trees. And if I don't get a chance to be around those things, I definitely feel very different. Yeah. It helps me be still, because that's not my natural state or nature.
Very good. And what about things like how many classes are optimum, and how early in the morning and how late in the evening?
I mean, this is something that is a constant struggle for yoga teachers, because, you know, we're not ever going to be millionaires, to put it mildly. And so you often end up saying yes to things that you might not if you had the choice. But you might need the work or need the money. One of the things I used to always say to people, but I've actually not been practicing this lately, is sometimes it is important to teach a lot of classes in one day, but as an ongoing thing, it's not very sustainable. So, you know, like 5 classes in a day, most people would be like, oh my God, I can't do that. But if you have a whole day off either side of that, it might feel different. But getting sleep and all of those things that are important to anybody's mental health and well-being are also important for yoga teachers. So, you know, even if you do have a whole chunk of your day off in the middle of the day, that you can't make up for too many mornings getting up early and too many nights going to bed late because you're, you know, teaching halfway around the world. So I think there's this idea often that if you have a lot of time in the middle of the day, you must be relaxed.
Oftentimes you're going, I need another class.
Right?
Good.
And holidays.
Yes.
Take holidays.
Holidays.
Some people are very, very good at this. Some people not so much. But, you know, like I talk to my friends who have salary packages where they have a chunk that's like, this is your holiday. Have it. This is your sick day. Have it. And we don't have those things built into the structure of a life as a yoga teacher, let alone other things to support us, like, you know, superannuation and, you know, all these kinds of things. So you have to build them in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we end?
The one thing I really think about often in terms of mental health, and I feel like sometimes I use language that blames society. I'm not really blaming anyone, but I think it's very hard in this life to make things work in a way where your heart is satisfied. And I think that is so important in terms of mental health, and that you know, yoga sometimes gives you an opportunity to listen to that when in other situations you might be encouraged to ignore it. Because if you're doing what you love, then hopefully it might make you a bit happy.
Excellent. And wouldn't that be nice? Well, thank you very much for your time, Sarah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yay!
Thanks.
Oh my God, it's hot.
I know, I told you, right?